This is the Read to Lead podcast, episode 545.
Most hybrid work situations now are the company says, we want you in the office, but how much can we bring you in before people start to quit? And the employee says, I'm kind of digging this work from home thing, but how often do I have to go in before they fire me?
Welcome to the Read to Lead podcast, the podcast dedicated to your personal and professional growth. I'm Jeff Brown, and I believe that if you want to achieve true success in your business and in your life, then intentional and consistent reading is a must. Now, the Read to Lead podcast is going to help you narrow this reading list and bring you the key insights and main ideas from some of today's most successful and inspiring authors. Each week, we're joined by one of these authors to chat about their latest book and their unique insights on things like personal and professional development, leadership, productivity, career, business, marketing, sales, entrepreneurship, and lots more. In just a moment, you and I will be joined by Wayne Turmel. He is co-author, along with Kevin Eikenberry, of the book The Long Distance Leader, Second Edition, Revised Rules for Remarkable Remote and Hybrid Leadership. I'll be asking Wayne to share about advice for leaders who are struggling to adapt their leadership style to keep pace with ongoing transformations, some common misconceptions leaders have about managing hybrid teams and how they can overcome these misconceptions to lead more effectively, practical tips for leaders to effectively establish, communicate, and manage expectations with their remote team members to avoid misunderstandings and ensure everyone is aligned, and much, much more. Oh, and by the way, be sure and stick around until the end of the interview. Wayne will be sharing about a free resource he is making available just for Read to Lead listeners. Wayne Turmel is a co-founder of the Remote Leadership Institute. He has spent the last 25 years or more obsessed by how people communicate at work. His work has helped organizations on 4 continents develop the communication skills needed to lead people, projects, and teams, and to make the adjustments to remote working and virtual teams. Wayne is the author of several books, including 10 Steps to Successful Virtual Presentations and Meet Like You Mean It, a Leader's Guide to Painless and Productive Virtual Meetings. He's also contributed to almost a dozen other books, and his groundbreaking podcasts, The Long Distance Work Life and The Cranky Middle Manager Show, have been entertaining and informing audiences for years. His clients have included the American Red Cross, Schneider Electric, Dell, and several departments of the U.S. and Canadian governments. Marshall Goldsmith has called Wayne one of the truly unique voices in leadership. Well, Wayne, welcome to the show. Of course, Kevin has appeared here a couple of times before. One time to talk about the first edition of the book we're going to dive into today. That was, way back in July of 2018, I think, for episode 226. Now we're on episode 545 to talk about the second edition, and I'm excited. Welcome officially to the Read to Lead podcast.
Well, thanks. And yeah, a little bit has changed since July of 2018.
Just a little bit.
In just about every way any of us can imagine, frankly.
To start, bring us up to speed of something the book starts out with, and that is your 3 P's and 3 C's as a framework for navigating remote leadership. And then, if you would, maybe an example from your experience where a leader successfully embodied these principles.
Sure. The 3 Ps and the 3 Cs come from the 2 books that followed Long Distance Leader. There were already 4 really good models in the book.
Yeah.
But we thought that what we had come up with in the Long Distance Team and Long Distance Teammate was worthy of sharing.
Yeah.
And so the 3 Ps were what it takes to be a great teammate. If we think about not necessarily the leader, but the members of the team. There's a difference between being a member of the team and being a teammate. And the minute somebody says teammate, I'm sure you have somebody in your brain that you consider kind of a really great teammate. And we found that there are 3 components to that. The first is productivity. You got to get your work done. If you're not holding, if you're not carrying your weight, clearly. But productivity is not just getting your work done, it's helping the team achieve its work.
Right.
And so that's helping each other out. It's maybe sacrificing your personal productivity one day for the good of the team. It's contributing to all that good stuff. The second P we found in our research was the most important, which is great teammates are proactive. They don't wait to be asked to do something. That's kind of the obvious idea, but also they reach out without being asked. They will ask questions without being prompted. They will take part in activities, projects. They will volunteer for things. That's maybe the strongest thing, because when you work remotely, it's easy to fall off the radar. And then the third P is potential, where you're taking a long view of things, so that, as a simple example, email and Teams chat messages and such can be extremely transactional. And you can interact all day, but not be building the relationship, not looking down the road and saying, I should invest a little time in this because there's going to be a mutual benefit to that. So the three Ps were what it takes to be a great teammate. What is resonating with a lot of people, and as we talk about going forward with hybrid teams and where's all this going, it's really important. The three Cs were what makes up a team's culture. It's the HR kind of smart alecky response to what is culture is this is how we do it here, which is kind of self-explanatory, but it doesn't say what the it is. What are the specific things that one team does that another does differently that defines the culture? And we found, without going too deep into the weeds, that there are three components. Fortunately, because Kevin is a sucker for alliteration, they all start with C, and that's communication, collaboration, and culture. How do we choose to communicate? How does the work get done? How do we work together? And then what kind of organization do we want to be to each other? How are we going to form the relationships that we need to form? And if you can define those things, or you can define what you want your organization to do in those three buckets, you pretty much defined your culture, and you can help define your culture going forward by establishing kind of the rules and norms in those three categories. You asked me about examples. I'll give you a very simple example, and I'm going to tell a tale on Kevin. I am a crusty old man. I am actually only 9 months older than Kevin, but I may as well be considerably so. And so I am not a fan of icebreakers on virtual meetings as a rule, right? If you were a tree, what kind of tree would you, kill me. So anyway, we're having our monthly meeting, and this is under the cohesion piece. We're having our monthly meeting, and Kevin always starts with an icebreaker, and sometimes it's relevant to work and sometimes it's not. And he starts with, what's your favorite candy? And grumpy old man brain goes, oy, okay, I'll play nice. I understand the concept of joining in the group. So I tell him, 3 weeks later, there's a 3-pound bag of gummy bears on my porch. No note from who it's from. Nothing, just a 3-pound bag of gummy bears. And I bring it inside because, leaving it in the heat in Las Vegas, it will become one giant gummy bear. But I'm a little reluctant to eat it because I don't know who it came from. And we all start kind of messaging. Did you get something? Yeah, I got something on my porch. We figured it out that it was Kevin. First of all, I mean, it's a very sweet thing to do, right? Literally a sweet thing, I suppose. It's a very nice thing to do, to send people their favorite candy. It's a lovely gesture, especially unbidden and with no particular reason. But it also got us talking to each other. Hey, Marlene, what did you get? Oh, gummy bears. No, man, I got this big bag of whatever the heck I got. And it echoed through the team for like a week and a half. And the goodwill certainly lasted longer than that. But that's an example of, what kind of team do we want to be? And fun is not a bad thing. Now, some teams take fun very seriously. Some teams are happy for it to be a byproduct, and others are firmly convinced that this is work and we are very serious at what we do. And that's how you start to define cultures.
Yeah. And you highlight how the sudden shift to remote work by many in 2020 was not merely a temporary measure, but a catalyst for lasting change in where and how and why work is done. That adjusting to these changes requires a shift in mindset and leadership approaches. Given the rapid and often unpredictable evolution of work models, what advice would you give to leaders who are struggling to adapt their style to keep pace with these transformations that are ongoing?
I think the pithy one-line answer to that is pilot before policy. Because the truth of the matter is, we're all learning this as we go. Some of us have maybe a little better idea and maybe a little more experience around the edges. And so we have a little better idea. Mm-hmm. But how teams develop, how companies choose to grow, how they adapt to the changing workplace. And don't kid yourself, we are in the middle of maybe the biggest, most seismic change in how work gets done since 1930s, maybe. I mean, if you think about the 1930s, introduction of the 40-hour work week, and the idea of the urbanization of society and the idea of a commute and things that were never really part of the equation before that, the development of the suburbs. And so we are going through and we are in the middle of a change. Now, we have some lessons learned and we have some, can I say wild ass guesses on your show?
Sure.
We have some wags at what, is likely to happen.
Yeah.
But nobody can say with 100% certainty. And what happened was remote work was growing at between 25 and 30% a year prior to COVID. And then people were just starting to say, hey, we ought to think about this. And what are we going to do? And there were a lot of conversations going on and not a lot of hard plans. And then, a third of the workforce got pushed across the Rubicon. And suddenly we had to make it work. And to some people's surprise, mostly senior leaders, darned if it didn't. Productivity did not fall off particularly. Employee engagement actually went up in the first few months of the pandemic. And work that we never thought could be done remotely, we kind of had in our head, well, sales can do it. And maybe, if I'm just filling out spreadsheets all day, I could probably do that at home. But we found that there was tons of work that could be done at least remotely some of the time with no drop off in productivity or quality of work. And senior leaders were like, well, people won't work if we're not standing over them and we can't see them come into the office. Well, that didn't happen either. As a matter of fact, the first 6 months of the pandemic, the problem was people were working too much because the office, the 8-hour workday central location creates guardrails around our time.
Right.
When we didn't have those guardrails, and I'm sure you experienced this like we all did, you roll out of bed and you check your phone and you start answering emails and you still work as much time as they said to, and there's nobody to tell you to go home. So you're probably going a little long. And then your boss sends you an email at 10 o'clock at night and you feel obliged to answer it. And, when we would ask people, so you're not driving to work, you're not doing all that stuff, what are you doing with the extra time? At the beginning of the pandemic, well over 50%, the answer was working. So there was a lot that we didn't expect and a lot that we've learned. And then, things came and it was returned to the office and there was a mix of responses ranging from, no, you guys are working remotely and that seems to be working, cool, to we want you back in the office just like the before times and we're going to pretend the last 2 years didn't happen. But mostly because the genie's out of the bottle and people have experienced remote work and the sky did not fall in, there's been this hybrid, they're calling it hybrid. I'm using that word now in the generic term because like the Princess Bride, that word doesn't mean what you think it means. But it's, well, we'll go in the office a couple of days a week and you can work from home the rest if you feel like it. And we're in this kind of largely in this no man's land.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're in this new place and it's like, okay, let's see how this works.
You mentioned hybrid not meaning what you think it means. You guys examine the differences between remote, virtual, and hybrid teams and how these variations impact leadership approaches. And even with, I think you argue even that with one remote team member, the dynamics shift pretty significantly. What are some maybe common misconceptions leaders have about managing these teams, and how can they overcome these misconceptions to lead more effectively?
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions, especially if they've returned to the office, is, well, it's just like this. And if you're not in the office, it's just like being in the office. You know, you clock in at 8:30, 9 o'clock, whatever time you clock in, and you're going to work for the day and you're going to clock out when you clock out. And we want you on webcam so that we can see you. And we expect you to be responsive to your teammates. And they just kind of go on with that as if nothing has changed. And of course, that can work, right? Assuming that everybody is giving their best and aware of what they're doing and have read all our books. But the truth of the matter is that there are dynamics that get set up that leaders need to be aware of. Most definitely, the biggest one is proximity bias. Which is the very natural, perfectly normal human brain functioning that says, if I need something, I am turning first to the person that I am in closest physical proximity to, and failing that, the one that I've known the longest. And so that can lead to a perception of favoritism where the boss likes the people in the office the most.
Yeah.
The most corrosive thing on a remote team is exclusion. And whether that is intentional or merely perceived, that is a huge deal for remote workers, is they need to feel included. And leaders, especially now in a hybrid environment where this is becoming more and more the norm, the leaders need to be aware of intentionally including people, because that impacts their engagement. It impacts succession planning. It impacts how long they stay with the organization. It impacts a lot of things. If we are going to have people working remotely and still offer them career tracks and chances for promotion and those types of things, we need to be aware that we need to occasionally reach out, perhaps more than we would with people in the office. We need to not immediately default to the closest person when we need to delegate a task.
And I would think that sometimes that may be impacted by a leader's technical proficiency. By that, I mean, and what I'm getting at is your remote leadership model highlights the importance of both traditional leadership and management skills alongside technical proficiency.
Well, yes, because you can't do the job without the tools. And so a big part of the book, and this has not changed particularly except for the tools that we use, which have changed a lot. You have to choose the right tool for the right job. And it's not only the leader's proficiency, it's also their work style. We all know leaders who love leading by email. It's fast, it's convenient in its most horrible form. And here's its most horrible form. My wife was once fired by instant messenger.
Oh.
Now, yeah, see the horrified look on your face and that little response is the correct one, right? Any sentient human being would agree that that is a terrible way to do that.
Sure.
But it worked. She was unemployed at the end of it. He didn't have to deal with crying employees and drama and all of that kind of stuff. We can make all kinds of perfectly legitimate assumptions about his leadership style, but that's what you're going to get when you rely on the technology. Now, that's a horrible example. But here's one we've all been guilty of. Kevin needs to give Wayne some feedback, but it's 4 o'clock on a Thursday. And you know what Wayne's like. I'm just going to send him an email and I'll deal with it later. Now, if you were a managed by email type, that would be really easy and tempting to do. Depending on the feedback, it might not be the correct or the morally, ethically, psychologically right way thing to do.
Right.
But technology allows us. So what we have found is leaders who were really good leaders or tried really hard, at least in the before times, found a way to lead effectively remotely. Leaders that were kind of oblivious or weren't particularly good leaders really struggled because technology allowed them to take the easy way out, to maybe not do some things that might be uncomfortable or outside of their wheelhouse. But that's the job.
Right. What are some specific challenges that remote leaders face when it comes to managing themselves effectively? Maybe some practical strategies they can use to overcome these challenges.
We have a model in the book, the 3O model, that basically says for work to get done remotely or otherwise, right? There's the outcomes, there's the work that has to get done. As leaders, we get that work done through others. So there's the managing, inspiring, coaching others piece. But our piece of this is really important. Now, that's true anytime. In a remote or a hybrid environment, it is even more important because, again, we lack the guardrails that are there when we worked in an office environment, right? So, ironically, this is harder on people who take the job seriously and have a servant leader kind of approach, because the leader frequently takes one for the team. Right? We're in different time zones. So we need to have a call at 6 a.m. And we also need to have a call at 9 p.m. for the folks in Singapore. And I'll be the one to work the odd hours, right? Because I don't want to inflict that on my team unfairly. And during the early days of the pandemic, it was leaders that were dropping like flies and burning out. And because they always wanted to be available to their team when they needed them. And they were trying to take the pressure off by doing more themselves. And that ultimately is unsustainable. So we as leaders need to get back to first principles, right? What is it that needs to be done? What are the things that I personally need to be involved in? What are the things that if I train, coach, support, and set clear expectations for, can be done while I'm sleeping? And that is really the core of it.
Talk a bit about this concept you introduce of process goals to complement results goals, to provide a framework for setting clear expectations and promoting accountability.
Yeah. And this, again, is true regardless of where you're working, whether you're co-located or not. The problem is that when I am in the office with you and I see you heading for the coffee machine, my brain goes, oh, Jeff, is there any? Yes, I need to ask him how that's going. Right? We get these visual cues for our work that we frequently don't get when we work remotely. And so it's very common to have a discussion about a goal and let me know when you're done. But there may be days, weeks, months. And because we're not there, because the team member doesn't have easy access to us or doesn't feel they have easy access or is afraid to ask a question or say, help, I'm in the weeds, because they don't want to look incapable. It may be the end of that project and the deadline gets missed or the quality isn't there. That's a results goal. We're setting this goal. We're going to do X number of sales by June. That's a results goal. But there are steps along the way. And we call those process goals. Where if you set a goal of X number of calls per week, which is X number of calls per day, and we're a couple of weeks in and you're behind schedule, and I check in with you and we find out you're behind schedule, we can tweak, adjust, and coach and do that. If we do this correctly, these check-ins are far enough apart that it doesn't feel like I'm micromanaging you. Unless you need to be micromanaged. I mean, you might need a daily check-in to keep you inspired and on track until you're back where you need to be. But these things happen far more organically when you're in the office together than when you're remote. So you set the process goals along the way. And part of setting those goals is, how are we going to check in? How are we going to measure how you're doing? right? And here's the thing. If I tell you I'm going to check in every Thursday and you say, okay, great. Thursday comes along and Wayne is checking in on you. You don't feel quite so micromanaged as if it's some random day of the week. And suddenly I'm like, how's it going? The scariest words in the English language for a team member are to see the words coming across their screen. Hey, have you got a second? That's a terrifying moment,
right?
Especially if there isn't already a trusting, and because for the manager, that's a perfectly legitimate request for information. Hey, I need to talk to you about something. Is this a good time?
Yeah.
But when I see, hey, have you got a second? Depending on how my day's going, I'm like, what have I done now? I'm in the middle of something. I don't really have a moment, but this is my boss, and so I've got to drop whatever I'm doing and talk to her. And right, there's all this drama before we have a perfectly innocent conversation. But if those are built into the plan, there's far less drama.
There's a common perception, I think you would agree, that hybrid work is often viewed as a temporary fix, that hybrid work is a compromise.
It's actually a hostage negotiation.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Well, think about it. Most hybrid work situations now are the company says, we want you in the office, but how much can we bring you in before people start to quit? And the employee says, I'm kind of digging this work from home thing, and I don't want to go into the office more than I have to. I mean, most people say, yeah, sometimes you got to go in. I get that. But how often do I have to go in before they fire me? So we reach this negotiation, and it's usually something like 2 or 3 days a week. And it kind of works, right? It's like nobody's entirely happy, but it's kind of working and stuff gets done. But when you talk to people who are in these kind of compromised situations, they're not always perfect, needless to say. People say, I can't get any work done when I get to the office. I'm trying to get my work done and somebody's talking to me and it's Alice's birthday, so there's cake in the break room. And, everybody wants to drag me off into a meeting and I can't get my work done. And when people are working at home, they're like, it used to be I could get the quiet focus work done when I'm home, but now I'm on Zoom calls from morning till night. And here's where what most people call hybrid is not. This compromise is not really a hybrid. It's kind of a smush of, well, we'll make it work, and it's kind of going to work like this. True hybrid work. A hybrid in biological terms is two distinct things that come together and they form a third distinct thing. The classic example is a mule. Yes, it's a part horse and part donkey. But if you know anything about mules, mules are mules. They are their own thing. And what you want is a mule if you're going to a hybrid environment.
Yeah.
It's not just what work gets done where, it's what work gets done where, when. And the concept of time and time allotment and synchronous versus asynchronous starts to become very important. For example, if your job is fight traffic, come to the office, put your coat over your chair, put your head down, bang on your keyboard, pick up your coat at the end of the day and leave, you're right. You're probably not getting a lot of work done in the office in that environment. Maybe the days that you're in the office are the days when you say, I don't care about my task list. Let's have the conversations I got to have. I'm going to have the coaching conversation with my manager. We're going to maybe have lunch together one day and do some bonding and some relationship building. And on the days when I'm home, because we've done all that meeting and social stuff, I can be left alone to get my work done. Right? And if I'm home getting my work done, does it matter that I log on at the same time in the morning and log off at the same time as everybody else?
Yeah.
Right? My body, I'm an early morning person. Physically, when I used to go to New York to work and I'd go to the New York office, I was there at 7 a.m. by myself because nobody in New York shows up to work till 9 o'clock. Virtually, you got the same thing. I live on the West Coast. Kevin's on the East Coast. There's a 3-hour time zone difference. Kevin does not insist that I'm online the same time as the rest of the team.
Sure.
Now, it often works that way because I'm an early bird. So by 7 o'clock, which is 10 o'clock, I'm fully functional and at my desk and banging stuff out. I'm useless late in the afternoon.
Yeah.
I can work when my body clock works. And if we need to be synchronous for a meeting or to be available to answer questions for each other, there is time during the day when there's overlap, and that's when that happens.
You guys spend some time too, and I appreciated this, on specific strategies for remote leaders to manage the mental and emotional challenges of remote work, like isolation and self-doubt and even imposter syndrome. What are some practical tips you would offer those who struggle with negative self-talk or imposter syndrome, say?
Yeah. Well, as the poster child for that, I mean, I have said on numerous occasions that I would instantly fire any manager who talked to somebody the way I talk to me.
Right.
I am a terrible leader of Wayne. Part of the thing that you need to get is constant feedback. And leaders don't often get that feedback, right? We might get it in the office because as we're sitting around the meeting table, you're getting smiles and nods and you can kind of see who's digging what's going on. And you can stop people on the way out. Hey, was that okay? How do you think that meeting went? And you can get that feedback. We don't always get that feedback when we're not in physically the same place. And if we're using Teams for chat or we're on a Teams meeting, but the other person is on camera, you're really, really not getting that feedback. So one thing that leaders need to do is solicit feedback. So when you're having coaching conversations, a really important thing to add to that conversation is, do you have anything for me? Which is funny. Most of us think of coaching as, while it's a two-way conversation, the power all flows one way in a coaching conversation. Are you actively soliciting feedback? Do you have people that you trust, that you can go to them and say, hey, I don't think that meeting went the way I wanted it to. What was your take on that? Because if you're left alone with the voices in your head, generally speaking, two things happen. Either your voices are super negative and ugly, like mine can be, or they are super accepting of how fabulous you are. And in the light of any kind of major negative feedback, everything is great. And you have what those of us that are older understand are the Wile E. Coyote moments where, like in the Roadrunner cartoon, Wile runs off the cliff and he's way out there somewhere before he realizes that there's nothing under him. And you want to avoid those. And the way you avoid those is frequent, honest feedback.
Love that. You guys too suggest that developing remote leadership skills requires a shift from a training mindset to a learning mindset. I love this too. What are some concrete steps that organizations can take, Wayne, to foster a culture of continuous learning that supports the ongoing development of remote leadership competencies?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. The first is the learning, training, whatever it is that's available to people needs to be tied to the fact that even though you are remote, there is a reason to stick around, and there is a chance for promotion, and there is a chance that your career will go on. So people are motivated to learn what the company needs them to learn, right? Why do I give a hoot? The second thing is, in the early days of the pandemic, we fell into the trap of everything had to be distance learning and it had to be on demand. And yes, you need some immediately available, no matter where you are, I can get the answer to that question, right? Bite-sized e-learning chunks are critical, but we missed out on the fact that good learning is very often social. The opportunity to interact with other humans is not only a good way to learn, it's also a motivation for wanting to learn, right? I enjoy taking classes with other people. And one of the things that organizations have picked up on, and I'm delighted to see is continuing post-pandemic, is the idea of cohort learning. So it might not be my entire team is taking this class, but because we're scattered to the winds and we don't always know who people are in other parts of the organization, people from different divisions, functions, teams are taking part in learning together, which not only helps us learn, but also creates social bonds and networks inside the organization that used to happen when everybody was there all together to a degree, but isn't happening because one of the things that we have found is that teams that function really well in a virtual and to a degree a hybrid environment function really well, and the nuclear team is really solid, right? Everybody on the team knows everybody else. We know what we're doing. We support each other. It's great. Don't have a clue what's going on outside our team. Don't know what's going on in the rest of the organization. And learning can be a big piece of that.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a client who has taken to, on their team meetings, will bring in somebody from another team or another division to say, hey, here's what's going on with us. Information that they might not get otherwise.
Yeah. Well, Wayne, you've offered a wealth of practical advice and strategies from the book. What would you say are the top 3 things you hope readers take away from this conversation and from the book and implement immediately?
Yeah, I think number 1 is stop. Just stop for a minute. We actually, right after the pandemic, had a moment where we could stop and think about what do we want to do going forward. And, I've had these ideas while we were away that I'd like to implement. And that was great. But now the boat's in the water and we're so busy doing it that we often don't stop and think. So there are some assessment questions in the book that I think are worthy of taking some time and saying, stop, right? What's working? What isn't working? What would we like to have happen that we don't think can happen? So taking the time to stop and ask those questions is really important. The second thing is, has your team had explicit conversations about what tools we're using, which tools we use when, and what is the best way to use them? An amazing amount of stress is caused by people not using or not properly using status updates. Yeah. You're green. You've been green all day. I'm sending you messages and you're not answering them. I don't know why. But if it was do not disturb and I filled out the little message part that said, I'll be back after 2:00, that's a lot of stress, right? Either I'll go somewhere else for an answer or I'll come back to you at 2:00 and I'm not sitting there waiting for an answer that's not coming. Yeah. So actual explicit conversations. Napoleon said, if you want to avoid war, you avoid the 1,000 little pinpricks that lead to war. And technology use is a lot of pinpricks.
Yeah.
The third thing, starting immediately, is do you create opportunities for your team, no matter where they are, to interact with each other one-on-one? Because if you leave it up to them, a couple of things happen. One is clicks form. The people in the office tend to talk to the people in the office and include the remote people when they remember. You also have a situation where the people who've known each other longest work together, and it makes it really hard to onboard or bring in new people to the team. And so is the team proactive in reaching out to each other and doing that? And are you as the leader helping to create opportunities for that, right? When a project comes up and Bob says, great, I'll grab Tony and Mary, do you say, you might want to involve Gary in this one? I know he's new to the team, but he's got a lot of experience in his former job. You might want to bring him in on that. Because those things don't happen organically without just a little forethought and intentionality.
Well, this has been a great discussion on a second edition of a book that is out officially the day this interview is being released, September the 17th. Its new title is The Long Distance Leader, Revised Rules for Remarkable Remote and Hybrid Leadership. And it's written by former guest Kevin Eikenberry and today's guest, Wayne Turmel. Wayne, thank you so much for visiting us and sharing with us all that you've learned about this over the last half dozen years.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. And thank you for what you do for your leaders. I mean, as an author, how do you get the word out about what you do? So we really appreciate what you do, not for nothing.
Did you want to discuss that free resource you're putting together?
Yeah, this is a really, really simple thing, but a lot of people who either read the first book and went, what are we going to do with a second edition? Or didn't get on board the first time, and why the heck not? We actually pulled 25 tips from the new book, some of which were in the first book, some of which are new. And it's just a PDF document. It's easy to download. If you go to kevinikenberry.com/25 tips, you can get the PDF document, and it's full of some good stuff. A couple of things that we've touched on here and some things that we haven't.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Wayne. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
I've also linked to that free resource Wayne mentioned at the show notes page for this episode. That's at readtoleadpodcast.com/545 for episode 545. There you'll also find a summary of this episode and links to connect with Wayne online. One more time, readtoleadpodcast.com/545. Our theme inside the Read to Lead community this month is pushing through and even overcoming, in some cases, fears, psychological fears, the kind of fears we tend to face in the modern world. And this Thursday, we'll be welcoming special guest Angus Nelson to discuss this topic with our group. If you'd like to find out more about becoming a member of the Read to Lead community online with a Read to Lead Plus membership, just go to this URL, jeffbrown.me. That's jeffbrown.me. We have some exciting guests coming up soon on the Read to Lead podcast, including my fourth sit-down with probably my favorite author of them all. His name is Seth Godin. Got a brand new book coming out next month, and we'll be talking to him about that book. That and more on the way here on the Read to Lead podcast. That does it for this week, though. Hope to see you next time. Until then, as always, remember, leaders read and readers lead.